large numbers of people are being killed by heat waves all over the world. We just heard the stunning, shocking figure that last year in Europe, about 47,500 people were killed by heat. 47,000 in Europe. The year before actually was even worse. 60,000 people were killed. So we are in a completely different, deadly, killing situation of climate change now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Climate Emergency Forum. My name is Regina, and today we're going to discuss understanding heat risks. This is a very interesting topic to me in particular, because while we talk about so often what is going to happen to the planet, what's going to happen to all the living beings on the planet with warming temperatures, so seldom is the discussion around what is happening to us now and what will continue to happen to us on an ever-warming planet. I want to speak in particular to the health implications of extreme heat to women, and in particular, pregnant women. Now, I have seen topics addressing heat impacts and how they are not distributed equally, how women are more affected, how older people are more affected, how people in various socioeconomic situations and lower socioeconomic status are affected. And I've noticed that, especially when it comes to the discussion of women versus men and how these heat impacts will affect the sexes differently, that some people tend to take umbrage. There's fundamental misunderstanding that, men are people too, and they feel heat. The thing is, of course, this is very, very true, but there are differences. And one of the differences is pregnancy and how extreme heat will affect that. And this is why so many women are disproportionately affected. And of course, there are infant children as well. So this is something that's very important for women and children. And of course, men have their own impacts as well. I'm just going to speak to this issue. One of the things I want to say is that exposure to high heat throughout pregnancy, especially in the third trimester, is associated with a 27% increase in severe maternal morbidity. Now, this includes complications during labor and delivery. Some of the things that women can and do experience more of with exposure to extreme heat are cardiac effects, eclampsia, and sepsis. In fact, it has been estimated by scientists that for every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature, the risk of preterm birth and stillbirth rises by about 5%. So what does this mean? Women and children are already suffering. We know that 1.5 is not alive. We know that our mean temperature has already risen above 1 degree Celsius. So these effects are already being seen. So in regards to cardiovascular issues, there is often seen an increase in blood pressure and a higher likelihood, as I mentioned, of developing preeclampsia. Now, this is a very high health risk to women. Also, impaired thermoregulation. This is how we regulate our body temperature. Many pregnant women struggle to regulate their body temperature effectively. Their bodies are already working on overtime to support the fetus that is growing within them. So this can lead to increased core body temperature. That's very detrimental to the fetus's health. It's also detrimental to the woman carrying the fetus. Also, there's an increased risk for heat exhaustion and heat stroke. We can also see reduced blood flow, okay? And the high temperatures can divert blood flow to the skin, to cool the woman down. And this can reduce blood flow to the placenta, which can in turn limit oxygen and nutrients to the fetus. Those are just a few things that pregnant women will experience in a warming world. I will speak next to the effects on the child. And I want to turn it to Dr. Peter Carter because there are some things I brought up, including eclampsia and sepsis. And I would love it, Dr. Carter, if you could give us just a brief rundown of what those conditions are and why they're risky.
So preeclampsia and eclampsia are deadly disorders that kill young women who are pregnant and can also kill their baby. It's one of the things that as a physician, you've got to really, really be on the lookout for. You've got to really catch it and diagnose it early. And I'm saying that because most of the people, billions of people, who are living in regions that are most vulnerable to climate change are also the people that are most vulnerable socioeconomically. And there are large, large numbers of these people living in the lower latitudes. They have very poor, most of them, certainly not up to our standard health services. So any risk at all from heat and all of those risks are going to be deadly for those people, right? They're not going to be prevented because they don't have the services, they don't have the number of doctors, they're not going to be put into hospital rapidly, they're not going to be treated rapidly. So, climate change, oil, coal, and gas kills. And we are now in the killing, catastrophic phase of climate change. Large numbers of people are being killed by heat waves all over the world. We just heard the stunning, shocking figure that last year in Europe, about 47,500 people were killed by heat. 47,000 in Europe. The year before actually was even worse. 60,000 people were killed. So we are in a completely different, deadly, killing situation of climate change now. And there is no indication whatsoever that our governments are going to change course one bit. So the temperatures are going to continue to go up. The heat waves are going, heat waves, my God. We've known this for decades, right? Nothing's more obvious, right? You've got global surface warming, you're going to get more heat waves. And of course, the IPCC has told us, and we are now regularly informed that by the attribution scientists who are just great, that now they're confirming every one of these heat catastrophes, disasters, they can attribute to climate change. They can attribute to our emissions. They can contribute, and they are being caused by the fossil fuel industry. These deaths are being directly caused by the fossil fuel industry. This is the greatest crime of all time. I don't know. Few people seem to be aware or conscious of that. And as I say yet again, then obviously global emissions have to be put into decline on an immediate basis and rapidly in order to save the lives of really billions of people is what we're looking at now. Yeah, thank you so much, Virginia, for bringing up the vulnerability of actually women in general, pregnant women, many young women, and also their newborn babies, but also their children. Because we've also known for decades that those subpopulations, so called, are very much more at risk. And in other words, they get health damages, deaths more, and it's going to increase more and more and more. We're going to see more and more of those people killed. And they're going to be killed in the United States, right? We've got another heat dome in Texas now. We've got, 20 million people, 20 million Americans again under heat alerts. So, this is happening all over the world. Babies, of course, they've got this big skin surface area. They don't have the fully developed thermoregulation systems. So they're very, very, very vulnerable to heat, very vulnerable indeed. And, that brings us to another imperative, which of course is adaptation. We're facing a really big problem with adaptation because the adaptation is using air conditioners, right? There's no question about that. This is saving lives. But the other part of air conditioning is as we're getting these heat waves everywhere, and we're going to see it in Texas and the Southwest in the States in the next few days. utilities have to increase their cooling. So we're getting more emissions as a result of doing our best to adapt to extreme heat.
Thank you so much for explaining that, Peter. And thank you for also bringing in the issue of adaptation through the use of air conditioning, which does, as you state, save lives. But at the same time, it also costs lives because we have to look at the fact of the emissions of these air conditioners and future lives that will be lost due to the use of these air conditioners. Yeah, it's really a terrible, terrible catch-22, if you will. And I'm going to hand it over to Paul and hear what you have to say about extreme heat and how it's affecting us all.
Yes, thank you, Regina, and thank you, Peter. So James Hansen's, one of my go-to climate scientists, and the planet was warming 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade up to 2010, and since then it's about 0.32. He said it would be in the range 0.27 to 0.36, and it's closer to the high end. But of course, heat is distributed unequally on the planet. The heating is variable depending on latitude. So the poles are warming 3-4 times faster. The oceans absorb 90% of the heat. They're warming super fast. So any coastlines near these very warm oceans gets a combination of very high heat and very high humidity. We've talked a lot about jet streams slowing down and becoming wavier. And when you get these strong ridges and troughs in the jet stream wave, underneath the ridges, you get heat waves and dryness. And often the jet streams get stuck in place or they're persistent. So you have long duration heat waves that we're seeing. It's the temperature and the humidity combination that really affects the human body. So we talk about the wet bulb temperature. Theoretically, 35 Celsius, 100% humidity, your body can no longer cool itself down by sweating. But the practical limit is closer to 32 degrees Celsius with 100% humidity. So this is fatally affecting lots and lots of people. We're focusing on how the heat is affecting people, but it's also has huge detrimental effects on the ability to grow crops. So our food supply, also on livestock and also wildlife. And it's a very nonlinear situation. So for example, we're getting mass casualties, die-offs of certain species. They're fine at some temperature and humidity, goes slightly higher, and then you can get mass casualties. The response to the human body to heat is quite variable. Regina, you pointed out the very young people and babies are not able to sweat, so they're most vulnerable. Older people, their metabolic rate has slowed down and they're very susceptible to heat. Also, any medications exacerbate the vulnerability of our body. And even things like stress have huge impacts on women carrying babies. So heat waves are basically still a bit of a silent killer. I've done videos recently on the vulnerabilities of children to heat waves and also on the vulnerability of prisoners in the prison system, specifically in the US, to heat waves. And lots of people that are diagnosed as cause of death being heart attacks and strokes could actually have a root cause of heat waves just being too much for them. So we're not even recording the number of people that die from heat waves properly, and this is a huge problem. And again, it's hugely nonlinear. So, Mecca, for example, it was very hot in the annual pilgrimage, 1,400 people died. Raise the temperature a slight amount, raise the humidity a slight amount, and instead of 1,400, it would be 14,000 or 140,000 people. It's really, really highly nonlinear. How do we deal with this? Well, hydration is the single most important thing, I think. When we get too hot, our brain doesn't give the proper signal to hydrate, to drink water. So I think people, when it's hot and humid, you need to drink water, whether you're thirsty or not. It's very important to try to find cooling areas for sleeping, especially because, if the temperature doesn't drop at night and you don't have access to air conditioning, your body accumulates stress. Air conditioning is no longer a luxury, but it's becoming a necessity for survival. We need better, more efficient air conditioners. Heat pumps can pull heat out of rooms. There's some interesting work on using mirrors on rooftops. The MEER, the mirror technology, is being tried in some countries, and it can drop indoor temperatures in buildings, 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, and be a life-saving thing. I've talked about chill suits, cooling suits in the past, just cooling your wrists or cooling your neck area can cool your entire body because of the way that blood flows and the amount of blood flowing in those regions. So there's lots of things we can do, have cooling centers in cities, have less pavement in cities and more vegetation, et cetera. So there's all kinds of different things that we can do. But the bottom line is many people are dying today of heat waves. And many of these deaths are not being reported as due to heat waves. They're reported as due to some underlying, some other condition that actually is triggered by the heat wave itself. So that's a ridiculous state to not even recognize the full extent of the problem.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that, Paul. I not only are those deaths not being properly counted, but also the deaths from air pollution. We've done shows on that. We'll leave a link in the description to a show that specifically talked about the number of deaths due to the poisoned air that we're breathing. You mentioned the importance of hydration. That is very important, and along with that, we need safe drinking water, which of course not everyone has access to. Now, I did promise that I would speak to the issues that infants face in a warming world. And some of those issues are from the very start. Some of them can have difficulty feeding. This can really hinder their ability to gain weight and develop normally. They are also more vulnerable to infection. And as Dr. Carter mentioned, temperature regulation. If they lack sufficient body fat, it can make it very difficult for them to maintain their body temperature. I also want to talk about some long-term issues. Those are the short-term issues, but there are also long-term outcomes for infants that are born to mothers who have had exposure to extreme heat and the infants themselves who have suffered exposure to extreme heat. And this includes cognitive deficits. So studies have shown that low birth weight infants, they may experience mild to even moderate cognitive impairment as they grow. Of course, we know that this can affect their learning across their entire lifespan and affect their earning capabilities as they become adults. There are also observations of motor delays, which is an increased risk of motor skill delays that can impact their physical development, and also behavioral and psychological issues. These infants are more likely to develop behavioral problems and psychological disorders later in life. They may even have an increased incidence of conditions like cerebral palsy. But even if they just have the minorest of psychological impacts and behavioral impacts, again, this is going to deeply affect their prognosis as adults, as people who are able to contribute meaningfully to their lives, their families' lives, society as a whole. This is something that can affect really all of humanity. All of humanity. And low birth weight is also associated with other chronic health issues, including cardiovascular diseases and metabolic disorders. So if you care about humanity, you have to care about pregnancies experienced during extreme heat and the effect that it's going to have on infants and the effect that it's going to have on humanity as a whole. And I really do appreciate, Paul, that you mentioned this is not just humanity. Of course, I'm speaking today specifically on humanity, but also, of course, the other living beings on this planet. And since we're mammals, I can't but help think that this would have the same impacts on other mammals who are trying to reproduce in this warming, crazy world. So I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Peter Carter, and let's hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Regina, and thanks, Paul. You really covered the medical and health aspects very thoroughly. Few points to make then. Last July, we had actually another record month according to the USNOA. July was we have a whole year now, month after month after month after month, which has been a record. And last month was 1.5 degrees C. We've had a year of 1.5 degrees C temperatures at 1.5 C, and in many cases above 1.5 C. And the scientists are still telling us, don't worry too much, we can keep it below 1.5 degrees C. That's not helping the future. That's not helping our children. That's not helping families. It's really terrible because, as James Hansen and his team determined last year in their great paper published in November, the warming that we have in the climate system already, the heat that's in the climate system, lower atmosphere, added by our greenhouse gases, of course, mainly in the oceans, is a heat that equates to at least 2.4 degrees C. So our scientists and our leaders have to start telling the truth because that's one hell of a temperature increase. Thanks for mentioning air pollution with heat. Yeah, because this is a double killer, if you want, particularly for those people, particularly living in the industrially developed regions of the world where they have a lot of air pollution, and 10 million people every year are killed from fossil fuel air pollution. I mean, all this just boggles the mind, right? You know, the criminality of this is just unprecedented. And it goes on and on and on. And our governments continue to subsidize the worst, greatest killing industry in the world that we've ever seen, giving those fossil fuel corporations our money. So yeah, the main component of air pollution is ozone, ground level ozone, and that's produced by a chemical reaction of emissions from fossil fuels and with solar heat. So this we've known also for decades that as heat increases, we're going to get more and more and more air pollution from ozone, but also the other air pollution from particulates is made worse by global warming. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really, really appreciate that. And I appreciate you, our audience, for being here. You're a loyal bunch. We recognize you, and thank you so much for being here. I always love what I learn on the Climate Emergency Forum, and I hope you do too. So if you've learned something, please share this video. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. And if there are other health impacts that you think we've left out of this particular discussion, we really, really would like your input because you have added so much to the lively discussions that we have, and we really appreciate that. And now I'm going to turn it back to Paul.
Yes, thanks again, Regina, and thanks, Peter. So we have made some progress on addressing heat waves. You know, if you remember back to 2003, there was a massive heat wave which killed about 70,000 people in Europe. And that kind of was an eye-opener for the world that these heat waves can be deadly. Since 2003, we've had tremendous warming. We're much, much hotter by probably 0.4 degrees Celsius since then. If you take the 0.32 degrees Celsius per decade rate, you know, 2003 was a while ago, almost 20 years ago. So, you know, things are a lot worse now than they were then. If we had an equivalent heat wave to then, it would be more like a few thousand casualties as opposed to 70,000 casualties. People know, you know, they know a bit better how to respond to heat waves. You know, one of the big problems is the urban heat island effect, which we haven't mentioned yet. Cities are mostly concrete and steel buildings, and they're made of materials that absorb a lot of heat, tremendous amount of heat, which creates this heat island effect. So cities are much warmer than the surrounding countryside, often even as much as 3 degrees Celsius, maybe 4 degrees Celsius even. So cities are working hard to, some cities, hopefully lots of cities, to provide cooling centers to people, which are air-conditioned spaces that people can go to. Air conditioning units have dropped in price significantly over the last few decades, so they're more accessible to people, but not everybody still. There's many countries where, you know, there's not air conditioning. I mentioned that the heat deaths of prisoners that are incarcerated in the US prison system. It's worse in Texas, and we have another massive heat wave coming. You know, I think 70% of all prisoners in the prison system don't have any access to air conditioning in their cells. So they're confined in a small cell with unbearable heat conditions. It's very inhumane to subject them to this. I think if you look at the cause of death in the US prison system, in Texas particularly, they stopped reporting deaths due to heat waves. You know, now it's like heart attack, stroke, you know, and then they're measuring body temperatures of, you know, 107, 108 Fahrenheit when nominal body temperature is 98.6 or 37 Celsius. You know, the body is a system like any other system, and it can only withstand so much stress. And when you have cumulative heat day in, day out in long duration heat waves, it just really wears you down. It affects your brain, your thinking, your ability to reason things. And, like I mentioned before, you don't have a desire to hydrate, to drink water. So this is a real big killer of people. So there's lots of things people can do, and we need to have a lot more education on how many people heat is actually killing for the first thing, and what we can do to reduce the number and to protect yourself as an individual and your family and friends.
Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing up the treatment of prisoners and the lack of air conditioner. This is also something that I was not aware of. It's very important. And I agree, we all need to take care of ourselves, take care of our fellow members in our society. And we want you, our viewers, to take care, stay cool, especially as, we are in this heat dome in a huge portion of the United States and Canada as well. So take care, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next time at the Climate Emergency Forum.